Hey, I'm Kristy,
And I'm Stephanie.
and welcome back to another parent teacher conference where we believe that conversations about our kids shouldn't just happen once or twice a year. They should be an ongoing dialogue. In our previous episodes on human potential, we talked about environmental conditions that can hinder human growth. We looked at systemic barriers in schools and then took the conversation to online safety to bring awareness to the risks hidden in plain sight.
We come at the topic from another angle, not examining what needs to be monitored or what barriers need removing, but rather understanding the gifts within us that already exist that might just need a little more nurturing. We look to the brilliant mind of Dr. Iya Whiteley to expand our discussion on this topic of potential. Dr. Iya Whiteley is the former director of the Center for Space Medicine at University College London. Drawing on ancient wisdom traditions and cross-cultural spiritual practices, she developed psychological support tools for astronauts on missions to Mars and the Moon. She holds a Ph.D. in cognitive engineering and a master's degree in clinical psychology. And her work has been featured on things like PBS, National Geographic, and BBC. Alongside her scientific work, she is a mother, as well as an innovative baby book designer and illustrator. And so across all fields, her work explores human potential throughout the lifespan, from highly accomplished professionals to infants just days old.
She recently published a book titled Born Knowing: How Children Awaken the Sacred in Everyday Parenting, in which she explores the idea of children as profound spiritual teachers. The book examines how children's presence can awaken dormant wisdom, why challenging moments can invite personal transformation, the hidden curriculum within family life, and how to recognize the teacher within one's own home. Today, we welcome Dr. Iya Whiteley to share her unique set of experiences and to shed light on the topic of human potential.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. And maybe we can just start off by diving a little bit into your work. So, what is your primary focus and how does your work explore the topic of potential?
It began really early, as every child holds curiosity in how they explore the world. I was always curious, what can we do? What are we capable of? And that started with more sports and exploring later through psychology. And also I found that there is more to what we see and what we can tell. And that was informed by martial art specifically. And also I found when, for example, I was in a national team on trampoline, and I found also in, I think it's called highboard diving. So when you jump from various heights into the water, which also used the trampoline, I found that I knew what to do and I couldn't understand how. So you, for example, you flip backwards and twist, and then you know when to stop. And you don't have time to think when you stop. In a sense, they tell you later that you use references on the ceiling or, as you see the trampoline or as you see your feet. But actually, I used to find that I just knew what to do, and it wasn't descriptive. The coach wouldn't tell you. They twist you a certain way, and then you had to have that inner knowing, orienting, and then all of that had to come together. And you would just know, and they will tell you, well, put an extra twist, put an extra sharpness, tighten, relax, pull more. But if you try to explain it to somebody else, in order to program it, it would be very difficult. And similarly, it was the same in martial art, is that you had to know what would be the next movement that your opponent would do. And my favorite part of interaction was when we were, in a sense, dancing, meaning that we would actually touch each other with the back of the hand, and we had to push and pull in such a way that there is minimal resistance, but you are not infringing on someone's space. You're just feeling where there is a space to go and when there is none. And then you kind of explore that. And I found that interesting because you could anticipate. And after a while, it becomes more intuitive and it looks fluid, as if you know what to do, but really you're discovering it in every moment. And I found that fascinating, especially anticipating what the person would do. I mean, I guess similar is in dance. When you're dancing and you don't have as partners and you don't have the rhythm, but you're not anticipating precisely that next move. You are collaborating in that space. And I found that fascinating. So I just went on to study from every possible angle.
That's beautiful. Even just kind of the awareness that you had through simple, everyday, ordinary things that led to big questions and your career focus. Starting with something that anybody might be involved in, like sports, martial arts, etc. You had an awareness that you were doing things without perhaps an explanation, and how that something again that anyone can be part of drives your curiosity. How did that lead you to the work that you are on today?
I was fascinated to see how can we improve performance, or where does the information come from? And that led me to study cognitive engineering and performance, and also designing spaces and equipment to improve that. And has various names, from human computer interaction. And my particular expertise was designing information for pilots in an aircraft cockpit. And I was studying at the time when we as a society, modern society, were converting from analog glass cockpit, which is just clocks, where dials like you would see before in the car, like a petrol needle will be going, or a clock or speedometer. But there are many, many more instruments in the cockpit. And there was a possibility to make this a picture or painting, and you can use any colors, any paintbrush, if you wish, and you can redesign an entire space in the cockpit. And that was fascinating for me. So I started to study, what do pilots actually need to know, because the problem that we encountered at that time was that information that was put on the cockpit was designed by engineers who knew how the machine works, who knew what the possibilities of what we can put on the display. And that created challenges, because an engineer is not the one, often, very, very much often, do not fly the aircraft. They feel that that's an important performance parameter for the machine, but it's not what the pilot uses to fly the plane. And the easiest way to say that, for example, you don't particularly care how much fuel you have in your car in terms of liters. You want to know, where is the nearest petrol station, and can you get there with that amount? So can it afford you to travel given the traffic, given the diversions, given time of the day, I don't know, electric car, or anything, but specificity of that. And that affordance, which is an interesting word, what is your environment affords you to do, invites you, or what the possibility are there. And I found that people read really well, especially people who work in extreme environments. What I mean by that, when there is either time limit, or there is safety limit, or there is a critical infrastructure, and they read the environment and see what's possible. So in a sense, they make decisions and problem solve in real time, and they pick up what resources are available, internal, team, equipment, and that's where I kind of work.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to hear about the intersection of the spheres of your life and your expertise between sport and how it's bled over to psychology, and now like the extensive engineering design. And I mean, for me, it sounds like you're speaking to, I think, really the impetus or emphasis on experiential expertise, right? And how much that's important when we're thinking about larger scale design. I really value what you said about the body's memory and movement, and sort of that innate instinct, and how hard it can be to sort of take that understanding and translate it to someone else. In my own experience, I was a track athlete for the better part of my life. And when I was done competing, I transitioned to coaching to keep that love alive. And so I totally appreciate how difficult it can be when your body just knows how to do something, how to take that memory, that muscle memory, and translate it for someone else. So I'm just in kind of weaving together these different realms and spheres of knowledge that you're talking about. Can you speak to the vitality of that input of experiential expertise in educational contexts and why it's so needed?
It's something that I wonder, since, of course, having children, but also myself being in school when I was studying, and also trying to understand. I felt quite early, I would say, that every teacher have their own preference on how they want the information to be presented, how they would like it to be said. And it's almost, we had different math teachers and different physics teachers, and it was clear that to me that they were thinking differently. And one would allow flexibility and exploration and the other one wouldn't. And I found that engaging on one hand and disengaging on the other. So when there was a teacher that was allowing for me to explore how I can arrive to an answer given what I know, rather than having a prescribed formula to arrive, for example, to an answer. And I found that similar aspect with working with in my profession, that allowed me to kind of see, so how would it apply to an education aspect? So because I was involved in designing training program for astronauts and also writing up programs after we've designed equipment, so like an instruction manual, it was vital for me to understand how people think and then tailor the curriculum to that. So although it started early in school, that curiosity, that continued, I guess, unknowingly in my profession, where I was studying what information person accumulates and how they then apply it. And what was fascinating with high performance is that they continuously update, if you wish, their knowledge field, and they always try a suit, try a new way of thinking, try a new way of problem solving. And they're curious about how other people do it and see if that matches. So I didn't find that they're set in their rigid ways. And yet I found in educational system, what I see, I guess that was the choice for my children. I chose in the beginning to follow Montessori philosophy, where they have a chance to explore their attention span and how much they want to focus on a particular task. And also they were invited through their environment in a similar way. If it's available, they cannot not explore. It's just in our nature to explore. And in having a bigger classroom, it's harder to do that with 30 children and predetermined success rate, or I don't know, I'm not sure teachers speak, but the success criteria of in order for the teacher to orient how much they need to focus. So because as my understanding is as much as teaching, as much as understanding how to then what to repeat, what to engage more. It's a measurement for the teacher to orient on how far the class has progressed as a whole. So what I found, the implication for me would be to allow for children to arrive using their own method in addition, or invite them to invent their own method to arrive to the same answer. If the children are able to do that, right? Not everyone would be interested, but almost like an extra curriculum challenge is that how can you invent your own way to do this? So what kind of questions also can you ask? What else are you interested to know about this topic? So I found that the more questions we ask, the more discovery happens in how people think and how they can explore what they're capable of, rather than telling them what they should be capable of. I'm not sure if it makes sense.
Kristy, it looks like you have some thoughts brewing. I invite you to ask them.
She knows me so well. She knows my face by now. No, it's so interesting, I think, what you're speaking to. And I think for me right now, with the rapid changes that we're seeing in the classroom and schools and the way that students are learning and all of the conversations that are happening around how they best learn, it's so interesting when you talk about the importance of adjusting for understanding, right? In the way in which a teacher is a master of doing that. I know there are a lot of conversations happening right now around the rapid application of AI for the purpose of bettering the teaching practice. But I mean, the counter to that is it warrants a real shift away from the human to human piece and the intuitive and trained aspect of teachers to adjust for certain things. So one of the ways in which AI often misses the mark is that, yes, it can tailor individualized learning and tell a student when they get something right or wrong and adjust the questions according to the level that the student is deemed at. But it doesn't have the capacity, at least yet, to ask why they're getting it wrong, to ask those kind of critical probatory questions to get at where the student sits in terms of their understanding, their context, their background, the frames that might be inhibiting their understanding. And so that kind of complex process that I think you're speaking to of seeking to understand the context of the learner, the background, the frame of reference, all of those things is a place that it seems like technology most often right now misses the mark.
Yes, I think there's another aspect that AI cannot help. And just as we were talking about the teacher and human component presence, is the quality of attention. And the quality of attention, which is, I found that that's what we were training, and also in martial art, right? In terms of meditation, how focused you are. And that is the key to learning. If you are not attentive, then you cannot pick up, all of your perceptual field is not open. And if you are not open, you cannot react quickly, you cannot absorb information quickly. And in aviation, or in critical and in aviation specifically, it's called situational awareness. And that allows you to continuously update what is happening. It's sort of like you swim in a bubble, or you're flying or walking, or you're traveling, or even learning in a particular bubble. And as soon as you are not paying attention to new input, it could distract you later because you haven't paid attention, and suddenly you have to. So you are unable to filter as it comes, in a way. And that quality of attention is driven by curiosity. And what I found in corporate part or life is that how can we motivate the team, right? It's like a biggest thing. How can the team work together, and how can we motivate people to do their work better, faster, more efficiently? And I felt it's the same in a school, but in a school, it's completely apart from, I'm just referring to one method, but I'm sure there are. In a Montessori setting, it's driven by what the child is inquiring. There is a set objectives, but there is a choice where they want to turn today. And in school, you cannot do that at all. It's just like it's not even present there. Not at least in the curriculum that I see that my children are absorbing. And that I feel is soul destroying in the fact that the one key that allows us to absorb any type of information and propel successfully and keep sharpening our skills and finding what we're really good at is that they cannot maintain attention at all. We're teaching them to be forced to look at things that I don't know how to put that across. That natural capacity that we have as children, and as a mother, as a parent, you are consciously watching without even making an effort, unless you're sleep deprived. Right? But then even then you're doing it, right? Because you know what your priorities are. And that completely gets erased. And because of that, performance suffers. And that's why then we have to say, well, you're motivated by a mark that you're going to get, and the competitiveness enters, but the quality of attention is not improved because it's not driven from within. So until we can bring back somehow that resource that is the most precious, that allows us to drive our inner quality of discovering our talents, I feel we are almost desensitizing, us, because we went through schooling as well. And then as adults, we have to go to courses, to recover ourselves and find our true passion, what we truly like. And we know that a lot of mothers specifically have this opportunity when their children arrive, they suddenly rediscover and reevaluate what they're interested in. So yes.
I love that you're reminding us of our internal authority, and that we should take time to listen to the promptings of our own heart. And that is a driver of learning. When there is that natural curiosity or that internal wisdom that wants to be explored, or that, that inkling to look in a certain direction, that's what needs to be nurtured, it sounds like. With AI, though, it creates a pattern, I think, of us looking to the external, because I don't take a moment to stop, think about what I know about a topic or how I feel about a topic, or ask a question to myself. I'm asking the question outwardly. And so then by, typing into a computer system, you get an answer, somebody else's answer. you don't get necessarily your own. And I think there's nothing wrong with that at certain, stages of, learning. But I think that there needs to be time for children to think. And as you mentioned, kind of explore the things that come from themselves. So how do you think that we can do that in the world today with this other educator vying for our attention? What might that look like?
Yes, exactly. Artificial intelligence is good as an inquiry. And I think there is this beautiful component because we wouldn't even approach that tool, whatever that may, the book, the AI, the teacher, if we don't have the inner curiosity or some sort of inner drive or inner motivation. And equally, if we're not driven by that curiosity, our attention would just not be present, even reading the answer that AI is providing. And I guess the detriment currently is that because we want to, in a sense, not we want to, but potentially in the work that the student or ourselves want to accomplish quickly, we would do the shortcut. And that cuts that moment of exploration. And to me, that's a moment of not knowing and not having an instant gratification of an answer. So for schools, in the question this rises is not simply about how to respond, for example, to a student not knowing the answer, but it's about the environment that we create before they attempt. So if the student, for example, must manage before they even respond, they have to manage, not for every student, but a terror of public evaluation before they even make a first move. And we already, in a sense, subtracted something absolutely essential from the quality of reaching that. So in order for the student, in this case, not to, let's say, humiliate themselves that they've got the wrong answer, of course, they'll reach out for a quickest possible way so that they can get on with their own task. So that could be encyclopedia before, right? Or parents or other people who would know, kind of the shortest shortcut. But if we have the possibility, and I don't know how, I don't have answers for this. I'm more exploring on how can we allow for that pause to be there and not be driven by evaluation, driven by the quality of exploration. And the true exploration, true curiosity is born when we continuously want to know the next thing. Is sort of like when I'm exploring, I am continuously looking for how it shapes reshapes my original question, because I didn't get the answer. So for example, if we are with the child and they are seeing a new animal, or they're encountering a new phenomenon, and it was like, wow, how does this plasma ball, why does my hair stand up? Or something like that. Or, what's this creature? Why did the tail fall off when the small lizard was running? And without giving an answer too quickly, which is what we do in the school, we have a curriculum that has questions and we provide an answer. We don't allow space for that liminal space where there is a suspense, when there is the true birth of exploration and birth of talents, birth of inquiry, different types of inquiry. Some people inquire better in a team, some better do it, self-contained, some better need time, they need to draw, I don't know, they need to pull bricks together, they need to, get their hands on, they need to watch others to do it first before they get on themselves. And so it's having that space, be it AI, be it a classroom, be it whatever it is just allow them to wonder, because that's where the true humanness, ingenuity, creativity arises.
To add to that, I think absolutely the theme that you're speaking to is what I think is echoed, in every space that I see online, from people who are positioning AI frameworks or talking about workshops and webinars and the path forward. It's all rooted in process-based learning with a human piece first. So you're talking about the importance and the sanctity of that curiosity, right? And I see a collective emphasis on the value in that. And people, I think, still trying to process and plot how exactly to reframe education to value that, right? The process over the end result. I also want to bring us back to you mentioning attention, right, as a sacred resource. I did catch that, and I so think that resonates with this conversation too. We're clearly facing a big crisis in the attention economy, right, which presents a battle that feels like we've been losing for a long time with big technology and personal lives and in the educational space. And so I'm wondering, in looking to your wisdom in human psychology, how do we ignite the spirit of curiosity and intrinsic motivation in our children and our students? How do we bring them back to the centrality of that curiosity and that process-based learning?
I think it's in creative work. It's not in factual exploration. It's about, I think previously, maybe one example is debates of arguing for two sides. I actually was fascinated. I had no idea. I went to Nepal and we went to a monastery where children were taken, I guess, by parents because that was kind of their best chance at education and also a good life in well looked after, fed, and kind of out of poverty, but also it's a place to be educated. And I was wondering, how do they get educated? That I did not want to leave because we stayed in the monastery overnight, but I wanted to stay and see how they are studying. How do they handle all of these boys, that want to run and explore, and they had interesting games. But one of the things that they were doing is that they would engage in debates, and that would be a daily routine where they would have to argue for and against to each other. And once there will be one child sitting and the other children would be firing questions at them, and they had to argue for or against that particular concept. And then they will swap roles. And usually the eldest would get kind of the biggest grill because they can take it, but also because they were and they found this, engaging. They were so emotionally involved in that, and they felt it was a game. They were not sitting down. They could stand up and they could walk. There was no chairs. There was no classroom per se. It was the same playground that I would consider a playground that engaged. And although they were studying the material, they were studying material in such a way that they needed to articulate it rather than giving an answer. So there are methods on how we can present the material to children to maintain that self-inquiry, because there was no longer, and forgive me if I'm not speaking to all the methods and all the teachers, because I'm sure, we know there are plenty of gifted teachers who modify the material and they have that talent, they're born to be teachers. But I found that extraordinary that we can allow for children to spark each other and not have the authority that gives them the answer, but having the authority, the inquirer within, to push the path forward. And that focuses the attention instantly. It removes competitiveness in a way, because we're not marking how well they were doing, but they were how well for themselves they could explain to somebody else. And in that discussion, there were younger children who did not know the topic. I don't know if all of them were able to read already, because they look quite young in comparison. And the groups were mixed. They were not the same age. So that is interesting as well. So it's they are interacting, and there is fostering, nurturing or teaching, supporting, playing different roles. They did not have a single class. They all played together. They all studied together. They were just engaging at a different level with the same material. I don't know how it is in a kind of closed environment, but that's what I've observed. And I thought Montessori also have that component where children are also mixed age groups. So I don't know how realistic it is for a bigger classroom, but I think that mentoring aspect, or I know for sure that we practice that. If you are learning something new, if you can teach it to somebody else, that's when you learn the topic better, but also you are then adapting to that individual. So that what you said, Kristy, at the beginning, that human contact is essential, even if you've got the help of, any other material, AI, books, teacher. But when you engage with the material yourself in some capacity, that's what brings the attention, the curiosity, and creativity back.
And the way you described it also, I think, helps to illustrate your point earlier about, creating space in education for children to explore. Because never once did I hear the teacher did this or the instructor did this. It was, student driven, it was student led. And again, they can explore a concept, detach from it, and then re explore from another perspective, which is also, a beautiful skill to have. And it really does become exploratory because you're looking at the nuances of a situation. And I think sometimes with AI, there's an overconfidence in the answer and that back and forth, unless children are taught how to engage with AI, where it can create a back and forth specifically, they might be losing that. But also you lose the human spirit, right? And in that exchange as well, it's not just answers we're looking for. I think the quality of exploration involves the human spirit. It's not only the answers that we're getting, but the exchange that we're creating between one another. It was a beautiful example and an illustration of, creating space. And I think sometimes I think we all want to. I think there might be a fear to do that as well. I think, if my children don't look busy or if or how we think, busyness should look like or work should look like, then we might, perhaps there's this feeling that like, oh, well, I might be judged as an educator that I'm not doing the right thing because my children are laughing or they're having fun or they're firing questions or there's a little bit of noise happening. But I think ultimately, the more we have those types of exchanges, I think to just echo what you were saying, the more that we can build new habits and new ways of approaching education.
And just to add on to that too, Steph, it's really hard, right? I think there's a real stagnancy when it comes to curriculum and the updates around that, the revisions, the change, because I think there's tremendous pressure that teachers feel to get through the content that they're required to deliver, right? And I think so many of them are so well-intentioned and want to take the time to have those conversations that they know lead to that deeper level learning and resonance, but it's a constant negotiation between these are the things that I have to cover in order to get through the curriculum that I'm required to teach. And these are the intentions in my heart with how I want to deliver it, right? And those two things don't always agree when it comes to time.
So you designed the Cosmic Baby Academy for parents and infants, as well as a parenting course called Parenting as a Spiritual Retreat for children of all ages. Can you share a little bit about the inspiration for this work? So you are an educator in although not in the particular school system, you're certainly an educator in the design of these courses. Can you share a little bit about the inspiration for your work and speak to some of the approaches and paradigms for learning that underpin these courses?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I found that the most interesting, I guess, paradigm shift for me is that I thought, presumptuously so, that I knew a lot. I didn't know everything, but I knew a lot, and certainly I could handle a baby. Little did I know. And what I found is that the one thing that we were striving for was attention and also absorbing all the information and navigating it seamlessly and know exactly what to do next. And what struck me is that when I held our babies in my hands, I felt that they were so totally present and they were absolutely in the know of everything that was happening. Perhaps not in the words that I spoke, but they were receptive at all times. There was not a gap in their attention whatsoever. They were absolutely immersed in everything that was happening. And I thought, how do we lose this? How do we lose this? And then, go to retreats, learn meditation, learn from every single culture in the world to also find meaning in the world, not in the world, but in what we do, find what we like to do. As a clinical psychologist by training and, working to qualify, the most often case that people come in is that they're depressed and they have no wish to do anything. And there is no baby that, unless they are really unwell in some capacity, you cannot contain them usually. That's the problem. You don't have big enough container to keep them safe in. And they are just constantly exploring. And then something somewhere is pruned out of them, that they know what to do. They never run out of ideas on how to, I don't know, keep, parents on their toes or educators. And so I wanted to know, how can we learn from that? But more so, how can we remember? Because we were children, we're not that different. So why do we need to go to retreats? Why do we need to go to this expensive courses? Who holds the truth to all of this? But also in designing training and working and watching people and all of these professions like surgeons, pilots, astronauts, I found that they are constantly learning. They are never disengaged from the environment. And all of them have their own style. So there isn't one technique that I found would work for all of them. And that's why we have problems in designing training, for generic population. And that's why, there's a bell curve on who gets that training and they, ready to take it on, and some it just doesn't work for them. And that's what happened with me with parenting books. I was reading parenting books and I was like, oh, yeah, that definitely works, for so many people. It's going to work for me. And then it just doesn't. It doesn't work for the environment, for the timing, for culture, for, I don't know. There's so many circumstances. And so I found that after all of that, I thought, well, actually, the baby knows what to do. I kind of can navigate, around the baby, and also I have a sense of what they're likely wanting to do. And there is no need to stick to rigid schedule because I don't stick to one. And both our babies were different as well. So I started to see what is it that we can actually learn, and how can we, in essence, to learn the language of communication that I remember from within, to communicate with me with that true intuition, which I was also driven in my professional life. I was interested in how some people able to tap into intuitive knowing, and some have to struggle in a way, and they have to go through almost error transition in order to get to the right answer. And just like what I found is that the baby is not stopped by what we consider failure. They don't have that in their vocabulary. It's a method of exploration. When you fall down, you get up and step again. If it's hurtful, you attend to that and you continue because you are exploring. It's a method of getting somewhere else. And you're not learning to walk, you're learning to get to the next curious thing. or you're exploring, what are these hands? What are these feet? What are they doing? And what I can do. So I found that if we go back to our attention as parents and see if we can learn to observe in such a way that we pick up what the baby actually telling us without having a human language to have them tell us, then that becomes intuitive. And the more time we spend together, which is in most of the time, I guess the majority is mother or perhaps grandmother who is able to do that. But more and more now, fathers are engaged. There is a possibility of having that communication library, vocabulary developing. And once there is a respect for the baby has its wishes, and there's a way that the baby is communicating it, and we are going back to learn, in a sense, the attention and meditation that I was learning in practices. I could do this with the baby. I did not need to sit and read a mantra. I could hum with the baby. I could sing with the baby. It developed the same capabilities, but I've also attuned myself through that interaction, just like what we were talking about in this, human interaction, that give that loop or spiral rather, that allows us to, to bounce off each other and understand. And then once the baby is learning that there is not anticipation, but that they're heard in a sense, I found that then the mother is calmer, the baby is calmer, because you don't need to get to the level of what I think is right to do in general population, but it is right to do for us in this circumstance, which might be completely different at grandparents' house, right? And in our home or aunties or holidays or somewhere else. It doesn't transfer. The only aspect of transference is us. Whatever around is just reading the cues.
I think that's incredible wisdom, Iya, and I wish that I had had that with my first son. I have two boys, and my first son probably took a solid 2 years to sleep through the night, and I was just epitome of what you described, like searching out every resource, every schedule, every book that would just solve my problem. And I don't think as a first-time mom I yet trusted myself and my instincts enough to maybe go against what the norm was or the rules were for sleep and structure and scheduling and all of those things. But I have certainly found pulses of what you're describing with my second son, of just being connected, taking cues from him, just being more in tune with his needs and going with that rather than following a rigid schedule or saying it has to be this way because someone said it has to be this way. So I think that's powerful wisdom and advice from my own lived experience, and for the other parents listening and first-time moms or future moms, I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you just said.
Yeah, just to sum up that is that our greatest strength, in this approach, what it does not require. It does not require resources. It does not require specialist training or a new curriculum. It requires just a different quality of attention. And that is being available, to all of us at all times, where it's, in other ways, a common word is to be present in a sense, another word being mindful. But here it's to be in aviation speak is in being in a bubble of situational awareness. So perhaps fathers would resonate with that too. It's very much a high stake environment, and our situational awareness is the key to nurturing that mutual collaboration.
I just also wanted to emphasize one of the phrases that you said as you were responding. You said it's, when you're in a difficult moment, it's not failure. I don't see it as failure. I see it as a method of getting somewhere else. What a beautiful way, especially in the context of education, to reframe what failure is. And I think that sentiment, if applied to the education system, can lead to growth. It can lead to flourishment. It can lead to everything, because so much of our system right now is it's all around passing and failing, frankly. And if we reframed how we do education, to not think about it as a pass or fail, but just as a method to learning something new, I think we would have a very different outcome with our students. I think the energy around that word would certainly shift and change how people show up in that space. I wanted to just kind of ask now, you offered us a little bit about how you look at parenting and how you've designed your course and the approaches and paradigms that you have offered us, and how it's the things that we don't need to do that are our greatest sort of source of strength. And it's really our conscious attunement and presence. So how can your unique perspective from the design of your own approach, if it was widely applied to school today, how would it help our children?
Yes. So this was touching on what Kristy also mentioned before, being not a teacher in school, but understanding the pressure, because I have taught some curriculum and you have to stick to what is given. So the standard, that is assessed for later is the same. And we have really tried to introduce creative problem solving also into education inspired by nature. And what the single important aspect in that, and I think now, let's say, how can we use AI to help teachers and also help educational system? So in addition to newly generated curriculum, for example, or updated, put questions in there, because AI is really good in multiplying options. So it's to seeing, and we know the type of students we have. This is also widely available. The ranges is that what kind of questions can we ask without giving an answer to a child, so they can explore with each other in pairs, in class, maybe even give these questions to children to ask the teacher rather than teacher delivering the module. So reverse the process, because the most or the key component of learning, or the most ingenious aspect of us getting back our curiosity and getting back our drive and discovering our talents, it's a single moment of genuine, undefended, meaning you don't need to defend engaging in the hard problem, is worth more developmentally than hundreds correctly completed exercises performed under in anxiety of assessment. So my sole, I guess, request is that add questions to help teachers, to help students to that curriculum, so they don't need to come up with that they could just have their ingenuity, also their talent on how they could foster the environment for learning rather than spend time for what they don't need to. AI can help in that regard. And then there is a big tool available to the whole classroom, both for children and teachers, and drive it through question rather than an answer-based schooling. And I think that will change completely, because it's, this is it, is as a mother or as in a safety critical environment, if you stop asking questions, you're very likely to fail, because you stop taking new information. And the more certain you are that what happened, the less likely you're to be successful. So if you can continuously be humble, in a sense that you still don't know the full spectrum, but you are acting with the best intention and the best information available. So it doesn't mean being uncertain or inactive or not responsive, is that you are confident to fail, but you are happy to take a new input so you can update your model and find, be happy again, be creative again, and to find a new solution. So the idea is that if you can find how many ways you can fail, you will become that much better teacher, expert, student, learner. It will just grasp your curiosity, and you will also be able to teach others in a much better way, because you can see every failure before it happens in a critical environment, because that's what you want. If people never fail, they will actually be really bad in this managing situation when going gets tough.
I love what you said, Iya, about this idea of reversing the process, right? And putting the power of inquiry into the children or the learner's hands. As a counselor, I get to spend a lot of time talking to university reps and coming to understand programs, both in Canada, Ontario, and internationally. And I'm finding it really interesting, even in 3 years, to see how programs are evolving. Obviously, because the way learning has changed, the way that certifications and knowledge acquisition has changed. And an example that's coming up for me as you talk about that reversal of the process was a really interesting one in engineering. It was a small program out of Texas, but for one of the upper year courses, you had to apply, obviously, and have a certain amount of knowledge going in. But the structure and format of this class was to get some really unique brains together in the students in a space. And every single day, the professor's approach was to ask the students, what do you want to learn today? What do you want to problem solve? And it was entirely student driven as part of getting this key credit and component as part of their engineering training. And I just thought how fascinating. And obviously there's a knowledge base that has to come in and a certain degree of motivation and discipline, but that approach is living and existing, right? And evolving programs and certifications of bright minds.
Yeah, apprentice approach is that how did you do that? How did you manage that? It's all by watching. You are also continuously able to ask and query into the depth and trying to repeat the process. You are learning in that. So that's amazing. And I'm sure that's what I mean. It's just there are teachers, there are professors, there are educators, there are trainers, just others, parents who do that intuitively. It's not a novel thing. It's just, I feel like something that we can give is it's genuinely attending to what's in front of us, or allowing children to engage in what's happening with them without having to decide what it means. So as long as we keep this pause for as long as possible, that's where the inquiry happens. And that's when we find out what people are interested, capable, what their methods are. And that's the best way of learning, because we know if children, the key point of having a Ph.D. or a degree in Doctor of Philosophy, or a lot of doctorates degree in, can you do a research from framing the question correctly and then gaining the evidence and speaking the language of your domain to explain it to others so they could repeat your process and arrive to the same answer. So there's no reason why we can't start with that. We don't have to get a PhD to do that.
Well said. Well said. So, you developed this beautiful course, but you also published a book called Born Knowing that takes some of the wisdom from the parenting courses that you've instructed. In chapter 8 of your book, I would love to read a quotation and then ask you a little bit about it. So in chapter 8, you write, "Watch a child learning to walk. They fall perhaps 200 times a day. Each time they rise again without hesitation, without self-judgment. Their body seems to hold no memory of failure, only the persistent reaching toward possibility. This isn't mere resilience, it's conscious vulnerability in action." Can you just dive a little deeper into that phrase, conscious vulnerability? What does it mean to embody this?
Thank you, Stephanie. I want to genuinely distinguish this term, conscious vulnerability, and also resilience, because the difference really matters. So resilience implies a recovery, a failing or a rising, something that was damaged or disrupted, and the system can return to previous states. Resilience is a response to difficulty. But what the child demonstrates when they learn to walk is not that. It's the body holds no memory of a fall. There is no diminishment to recover from that. The next attempt, it doesn't arrive from bearing weight of, them falling 199 times before. Reaching is kind of a completion in itself. It is not kind of lack of awareness or it's a different relationship to the experience itself. The child is not unaware that they fell. They're simply not accumulating failure as a reason not to try again. And this is the vulnerable part, that us, when we were small, we remain available for the next moment without having armored against another failure. And that's where this evaluation problem comes in from external perspective. And that's what we do in schools and, put performance metrics even at work. But as adults, we learn something quite different. We learn to pre-protect before we make an attempt in public in front of others. And something we have not yet mastered. So we actually calculate the cost of failure. And that's where children become our teachers or remind ourselves who we were before, because we hold that memory. So if we can come back to that and perhaps find the way, not how can we almost not allow that to affect us, find the way. And I'm sure that there are, many ways to do this in a difficult way. But for schools, the question that this would be not simply on how to respond to student failure, but it is about the environment where we create before the attempt. So if the student must manage the terror of speaking in public, their evaluation, or, before they even make the first move to try to solve the problem, they're not trying to solve the problem, they're trying to solve the problem of how they're going to be evaluated. And we have already abstracted something essential from the quality of their reaching for their, inner talent of what they can do. So for us, remaining vulnerable, consciously vulnerable, is a practice. Genuinely be in the moment and see what we're truly capable of without considering that we will fail. Failure is, we need to find another conceptual description for us. Failure equals success. So we just should rewrite that word as being a beautiful word as many times as we need to reprogram our concept. And a single moment of that genuine engagement in whatever we want to do is a success, even if it ends up in the most horrific failure. Gives us an opportunity to see, not to do it again in the same way, but also it taught us so many ways to learn or creatively problem solve around it.
I'm just letting that sink in. That was so beautiful. A wonderful reversal of worldly values and new ways of looking at difficult moments in our lives that extend, beyond the educational space. But I think that's wisdom for every facet of life. Iya, we are so gracious for your time today. And we're so grateful to hear about your research. And I have admiration for the way that you've weaved together professional learning experiences and your own insight as a mother, as well as your spiritual insights. And I think not only are you an academic, but you are a spiritual teacher. Your work is powerful because as you develop and you understand and explore, you think about the collective. Is how can I take people with me on this journey? And I hear that answer time and time again, how can I prompt others to explore those big questions? So thank you for that.
My gratitude. I'm glad you joined together in creating these conversations, very important ones at the time, and also weaving them with something that we have genuinely in front of us. So how can that be cautioned against, but also become our tool?
Yeah, I too am so grateful for my part. I learned so much, and you've given me a lot to take away from this conversation. For our parents who are listening, friends, teachers, we hope you've enjoyed the conversation as much as we have, and that it's given you some meaningful insight into the depths of connecting with your child and the sanctity of curiosity and presence in learning, both formally and in life. So if you enjoyed the episode, please share it with a friend or fellow parent, rate the episode after listening, and subscribe to our Substack so that you never miss a conference with us.